Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you here in Medway. From up in Scotland, where I'm proud to be standing to be one of Labour's MEPs, to down here in the South East, where the party has a great set of candidates, Labour is on the front foot for the European elections. Labour is the only party trying to bring our country back together. Because, unlike the other parties, we're not trying to win the votes of just leavers or the votes of just remainers. Instead, we're reaching out to everyone. And we can do that because we're the only party with a bold, positive vision for transforming Britain and for transforming Europe too. And that's what this campaign is going to be about. Of course, the only reason we're having these elections in the first place is the Tories' chaotic handling of Brexit. Whilst Tories and others sow division and further instability, only Labour has a plan to invest in Scotland's people, communities and public services. And after 10 years of Tory austerity passed down to Scotland by the SNP, Scotland desperately needs Labour fighting their corner in Europe and in government at Westminster and at Holyrood. Every decision the Tories have made on Brexit has been dictated by the needs of their internal party management. Their behaviour has been appalling, irresponsible, and it has left our country in a genuine crisis. But there is an alternative. A party that will end austerity, invest in our people and communities and rebuild our public services. A party that will ensure that those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share. A party that in last week's English locals made gains in key marginal constituencies. And special congratulations go, of course, to Medway's Labour group, which is now the largest it's been in 20 years. There are many reasons why Labour is now putting forward a profoundly ambitious vision for what this country can look like, policies that are so popular with the people in this country. There are many reasons why we're refusing to let the Leave-Remain split continue to divide this country. And there are many reasons why we're excited about a fortnight on the road campaigning, because we'll be making the argument for a country that works for the many, not the few. But the main reason, ladies and gentlemen, is our leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn.
Jane, thank you very much for that, and thank you all for being here today, and congratulations to Medway Labour and to Gravesham for the great victory that you had in the local elections last week. Thank you for all your work on that. No one expected us to be holding these European elections, but the government's complete failure on Brexit means they're going ahead against a backdrop of division and of frustration. A vote for Labour is a vote to bring our divided country back together. Labour is the only party with a plan to unite our country and make it work for the many, not the few. We will end austerity, invest in our economy and our communities, and raise wages and living standards. Labour's alternative plan for Brexit, which protects jobs, living standards and communities, would end the chaos caused by the Conservatives and let us focus on the other big issues facing our country. It is a real and credible plan that would allow the next Labour government to rebuild our manufacturing industries and restore pride and prosperity to parts of our country that have been neglected for far too long. That neglect was, I believe, a major reason behind the vote for Brexit in the first place. 3 years of botched negotiations between the government and the European Union have left everyone frustrated. Over 17 million people voted to leave the European Union. As democratic socialists, we cannot ignore that. We voted to trigger Article 50 in 2017 and promised to respect the referendum in our general election manifesto and again at our party conference in Liverpool last year. But we cannot respect the government's shambolic handling of Brexit that has caused huge uncertainty for people, businesses and jobs. When Theresa May became Prime Minister, she didn't consult either Parliament or the country. Brexit policy was announced through a series of speeches, declared, never discussed. What we got was 3 years of the Tories spending more time arguing with themselves than negotiating with Europe. What the Prime Minister finally cooked up led to the biggest government defeat in Britain's parliamentary history. It wasn't until that damaging deal had been defeated 3 times that the government had already missed its own deadline for leaving, that the Prime Minister finally admitted she needed to compromise. Labour agreed to talks because we believed it was the right thing to do, to see if we could get a better deal in line with our plan. The needs of businesses and trade unions, a deal that would see us leave the EU but keep a close relationship with our major trading partners. So far, in those talks, there's been no big offer, and the red lines remain in place. It's actually quite difficult negotiating with a disintegrating government, with cabinet ministers jockeying for succession rather than working for an agreement. It is in the country's interest to try to get this sorted one way or the other. But we can never accept the government's bad deal or a disastrous no deal. So, if we can't get a sensible deal along the lines of our alternative plan or a general election, Labour backs the option of a public vote on it. I am very worried about how divided our society has become. Every week I go to a different part of the country, campaigning, meeting people and spending a lot of time listening to people in all kinds of different places, factories, schools, colleges, on the street, care homes, hospitals, all kinds of places. And over the last year, I've seen the divisions grow around Brexit. In communities, in families, there are real tensions. Real tensions. So how do we go forward? We could all retreat to our respective side of the argument and let the bitterness drive us further apart. We could allow ourselves to be defined only as Remainers or Leavers, labels that meant nothing to us only a few years ago. But where would that take us? Who wants to live in a country stuck in this endless loop? What's needed is a bit of understanding. Understanding of why so many people felt so frustrated with the system they voted to leave. And understanding why so many others believe that staying in the EU is the only way to protect our valuable, open and diverse society. Some people seem to look at the issue the wrong way round. They tend to think the first question is leave or remain, as if either is actually an end in itself. I think they're wrong. The first question is, what kind of society do we want to be? And on that, people can find so much common ground. Labour, and only Labour, stands on that common ground in this election. That's why we insist the real divide in our country is not how people voted in 2016. The real divide is between the many and the few. Whether you're in Tottenham or Mansfield, Stockwell or Stoke, Medway or Manchester, so many of the problems you face are exactly the same. And while the government's incompetence and divisions over Brexit have created this deadlock, the injustices in our society are deepening. Those injustices aren't to do with backstops, implementation periods and all that rather strange and often obscure jargon. They are about whether your children will go to a school that can afford the basics, or one where the head teacher sends begging letters to parents. Whether your relatives will be treated quickly and safely on the National Health Service, or wait in pain and distress for months. Whether your parents will get a helping hand in old age, or be left isolated and very afraid. And whether we as a country can end the burning injustices in our society. Theresa May once talked about them, but did nothing about them. Austerity, insecure work, low wages cause anger and disillusion. Some want to use that to stoke further division. But it wasn't the European Union that slashed public services to pay for tax cuts for the richest. It was a Tory government. It wasn't nurses and teachers who crashed our economy. It was bankers and hedge funds. And it wasn't immigrants who caused the biggest squeeze on wages since the Napoleonic Wars. It was bad employers. We need solutions, not scapegoats. When you blame your neighbour rather than the powerful for problems with the health system, or for overcrowded classrooms, or for lack of housing, you're letting those responsible off the hook. You haven't trained a doctor. You haven't trained a nurse. You haven't opened a new school. You haven't built a house. You haven't secured a penny of extra investment. All you've done is fuel an atmosphere of division and nastiness in our society. It is only by coming together and working together that we can improve people's lives. Labour will stand up for all workers, black and white. And we will guarantee the rights of EU citizens and students in this country, and British people who want to work and study in the EU in the same way. We are internationalists to our very core. That's what our party was founded for more than 100 years ago. So when we see the emboldened far right strutting its stuff across Europe, and in this country too, in the shape of UKIP and its hangers-on, our response is to strengthen our ties with working class and progressive movements, both at home and abroad. The biggest issues facing us, like tax avoidance and the power of multinational corporations, are international issues that demand international solutions. And the biggest issue of all, and it is the biggest of all, the climate and environment emergency that threatens everyone's future, cannot be averted by one country alone. Climate breakdown, air pollution, and the frightening, nay, terrifying loss of species demand and require collaboration across national borders. And I'm so proud that Labour led the way last week to make the UK Parliament the first in the world to declare an environmental and climate emergency. And I hope our action from the opposition benches sparks a wave of declaration of climate emergency by Parliament and governments around the world. Because we have to work together to confront the issues facing the whole globe. If we don't, then we're all facing a very uncertain future. So we will always work and cooperate closely with progressive allies in Europe and all across the world. These elections were also a chance to challenge the poison being peddled by the likes of Nigel Farage. He says Brexit is being blocked by the elite. It's not true. The large majority of MPs have voted for a Brexit deal in one form or the other. The Brexit Party is in fact the No Deal Party. And for millions, no deal would mean no jobs, an economic shock threatening entire industries, and here in Kent, turning the M20 into a permanent lorry park, causing massive disruption and, of course, pollution. It would be an elite Brexit that would only work for the richest. Those who want to deregulate, to slash public services, deny rights at work, and still further. It would be a Donald Trump Brexit, leaving us at the mercy of a reckless and bellicose US administration. Nigel Farage's Brexit is a Brexit for conspiracy theorists, for those who see Muslims and migrants or George Soros as their enemy. Only Labour can see off the Farage snake oil in this election. And stand by our shared values of respect, tolerance, openness, and be proud of our diversity. It's said that Labour is trying to offer something for everyone over Brexit. I make no apology for that. Labour will never be the party of the 52 or the party of the 48. We are the party of the great majority who reject the politics of smear and scapegoating. We're a party of unity and social justice. Other parties appeal to just one side of the Brexit debate because they aren't really committed to taking on the tax dodgers, the big polluters, or the financial gamblers who crashed our economy a decade ago, to transform our economy, our country, and tackle injustice, inequality, and the climate crisis. We need to unite the overwhelming majority of people and take on the privileged and the powerful. Labour will address the inequalities that help fuel the Brexit vote by investing in our communities and people all across the country, ending austerity and creating a fairer society. And we will lead the fight against racism at home and across Europe wherever it raises its ugly head. It's Labour that wants to bring our country back together. So, whether you voted Leave or Remain in 2016, I urge you to vote for Labour in these elections, for the party that is determined to bring the many together and take on the entrenched power of the few. Thank you very much.
Now, thank you. We'll now take some questions. First from the media. We'll take them in groups of 3. And to begin with, we've got Laura Koonsberg. And then, oh, it's okay. Right, Laura.
Thank you very much. Mr. Corbyn, you say that Leave or Remain are unhelpful labels, but there are many people in your party, many people perhaps in this room, who would like Labour to be a Remain party, who would like you to try to stop Brexit. Can you tell voters if Labour is now definitely a Brexit party, or could you still be a Remain party? And if I may, on the cross-party talks, you sound very downbeat about the prospects of a deal. Is there any chance of a deal now between Labour and the Tories to find a compromise?
And next, can we have Libby, please?
Libby Wiener, ITV News. Mr Corbyn, isn't there a danger that these elections could be even more toxic for you than the local elections because of confusion over your Brexit policy? Why should voters bother to turn out if they don't really know whether you're in favour of leaving the EU or remaining in it?
And we've got a question from a local journalist, Paul Francis.
Hi. Would you accept that the confusion over the party's position on Brexit cost it votes at the council elections last week? And what's your message to the 64% of voters in Medway constituencies that you will deliver Brexit?
Okay, thanks for your questions. Laura, your point about unhelpful labels. We are a party that contested the referendum in 2016 on a Remain and Reform programme. The result was, as we all know, what it was. We triggered Article 50, that was respecting the referendum. We have since tried to put forward and continually put forward a view of a customs union with the EU, access to European markets and protection, dynamic protection of rights obtained through EU membership to use as a floor for future Labour government policies. And we will continue to put those forward, and that's exactly what we're doing in the talks we're having with the government at the present time. And as you know, our manifesto includes the option of a public vote on the outcome of all of that process. The talks that we're having with the government have been difficult because, as I said, the government is in some degree of disarray itself. They're still ongoing. Our point is that we want to protect jobs, protect trade, and protect those rights that we have obtained. And we met again yesterday, and there will be a further meeting coming up. But quite honestly, the government has to move its red lines. We cannot go on having MV1, MV2, MV3, and then coming on for possibly an MV4 or a bill that we've yet to actually see. So we will continue with that. If not, the issue has to come back to Parliament at the earliest possible opportunity. On the question of the toxic nature of the debate, I'm appalled at the remarks made by Farage and many others that do create a degree of toxicity in our society. And we have to stand up against it, as I indicated in my speech. I don't want this election to become some kind of toxic election. I've set out what voting Labour will do. We'll obviously elect members of the European Parliament from the Labour Party, but it will also be saying we vote for a party that is serious about the kind of society we want to live in this country, and that message will be one that is put out very clearly. And a future relationship with the EU will be one where we have trade, where we have a similarity of rights and conditions. We fully sign up to the European Convention on Human Rights and the European Council of Human Rights, which we remain members of, and we will do that. The alternative being put forward by Farage and others, and the very substantial right on the Conservative Party, is actually a sweetheart trade deal with Donald Trump and the USA, which would result in investor protection powers, which would result in damaging rights and conditions that we have in our society. And I'm sure you will have noticed that there are those in the US administration and others that are eyeing up the possibility of American healthcare firms coming in to take over our National Health Service. Our National Health Service is not for sale to anybody. We will protect it, and we will do everything we can to make sure we have this relationship with Europe in the future. And we are quite prepared to put the issue to a public vote at the conclusion of the parliamentary process. At the moment, there has been not a majority in Parliament to get any of these things through. On the message that we're putting forward, I don't think it's confusing at all. I think it is a sensible message saying We understand what's happened, we've seen what's happened, we've seen the causes of what's happened, and we're putting forward a view that would ensure we have the opportunity of improving the social divisions within our society. And that is what we put forward in the local elections and put forward in these elections. And I'm looking forward to putting forward in a general election, which cannot be that far away. You cannot go on forever having a government with no majority in its own party, never mind not having a majority across Parliament as a whole. And in that general election, our message will be an investment-led, unifying economy in our society, dealing with the social injustices, dealing with the extreme levels of poverty, and giving young people hope of life in a country where they don't have to go into debt to get an education, and they get equally valued whether they go into vocational or university education, giving hope to a younger generation and a government that's serious about dealing with climate emergencies. I'm very proud of what our party policies are, what we've achieved over the past few years in putting them forward, and I'm looking forward to putting them forward in this campaign and in a general election campaign just as soon as it comes. I'm ready for it, don't worry about that.
Thank you, Jeremy. Another three from the media. Oliver Milne from the Mirror.
Jeremy, yesterday Cressida Dick said MPs face an unprecedented level of threats. Reports suggest that hate crime is rising on Britain's streets. Is this election a watershed moment to tackle the far right in the UK? And do the police and the authorities have the necessary powers to deal with the rise of the far right?
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Can we have Liz Piper from Reuters?
Hiya. I'm just wondering what Labour's position is. Is it the same as the government's in the sense that you actually don't want any elected Labour MEPs to actually take their seats?
And one more, Heather Stewart from The Guardian.
Hello, you talked in your speech, Jeremy, about how people who call themselves Leavers or Remainers first are looking at the issue the wrong way round. Clearly you think that's the case about Nigel Farage. Is it sometimes the case about the most ardent Remainers, do you think? The Lib Dems have unveiled their manifesto for these elections this morning, the cover of which, excuse my language, says bollocks to Brexit. I wonder if you think that's a helpful contribution to the debate.
You're going to tempt me into bad language. Oliver, thanks for your question. There is a horrifying rise of hate crime in this country and across Europe, with attacks on synagogues, attacks on mosques, and racist abuse on the streets. There is also a big rise in violent crime and knife crime on our streets, and my own constituency is not immune from that. There are issues here of policing and police numbers in relation particularly to knife crime and community security. The last Labour government introduced the concept of safer neighbourhood teams and far more PCSOs. There's been 20,000 police officers lost since the Tory government came into office in 2010 with the support of the Lib Dems. And clearly there has to be more investment in policing and resources, but above all community-based policing, so we have policing by consent within the community. Your point about the rise of the far right and the behaviour of the far right, whether there are sufficient powers to deal with them. The rise of the far right is one where there are openly racist and Nazi organisations operating in parts of Europe, where there's a rise of anti-Semitic parties and language, particularly in Poland and Hungary and other countries. And I pay tribute to the people, many of them very young, in all of those countries, and also Germany and Austria, Netherlands, France and so on, that have done everything they can to bring communities together and stand up against racism. The young people of Europe do not want to live in a continent that's divided by the power of the far right. Do we need more powers to challenge racist behaviour? I think we need to look at that, and we probably do. Do we need to have police have more powers to be very active in dealing with racist language and racist activities? Yes, we do, and also make sure that all police understand they have a duty to bring communities together by dealing with that kind of hate crime and hate language that occurs. I tell you, when you talk to a group of Muslim women, as I have recently, about their experiences of life on the streets of this country, it's not good. The abuse they routinely receive on buses, on trains and streets and so on is totally and absolutely unacceptable. Let us, during the month of Ramadan, be proud of the diversity of our society and respect each other's faiths, each other's values and each other's ideas. And that surely is a very fundamental message. A country that allows itself to be divided on ethnic grounds anywhere is a country that's going to be in serious difficulties. I'm determined we bring people together in all their strength and all their diversity. Is our message the same as that of the government? Well, absolutely not. Our message is very, very different from that of the government because a number of things. One is we want to invest in the future rather than continue the tax breaks for the very wealthiest. We will end austerity. Theresa May rather bizarrely claimed at the Tory party conference that austerity was over. You should have seen Philip Hammond's face because he hadn't been told. And he sits next to her at Prime Minister's Question Time and still doesn't appear to have been told because austerity is continuing. And so we fight these elections in order to make sure that whatever the relationship in the future with Europe, we are on the same page on rights and regulations, and that we maintain that trading relationship. As I said in my contribution, a no-deal Brexit would be disastrous for manufacturing and service industries across Britain, and it would be disastrous for the job prospects of many people. And that is why we have successfully in Parliament got the option of no deal taken off the table so far, and we also forced the government to finally concede that Parliament could have a say on this. Remember, when the first withdrawal bill was introduced, the bill actually gave powers that Henry VIII would have been proud of to the then Brexit Secretary David Davis, remember him? Which would have allowed essentially the Secretary of State to decide everything. We've empowered Parliament, and I'm proud of what we've achieved in doing that. On the message that Heather asked about, what we want to do is bring people together. What we want to do is get a message across about the kind of country and kind of continent we want to live in. And we are contesting these elections with our candidates because we want them to be elected and we want them to play their part in the European Parliament as long as they is there. And I thank the Labour MEPs for the work they've done on environment, on challenging the unaccountable power of multinational corporations, on what they've done about dealing with the refugee crisis in a decent humanitarian and human way, of standing up against the far right in the European Parliament or anywhere else. So, of course, we're contesting these elections very seriously in order to get that message across and work with people across Europe. And indeed, since I became leader of the party, I've spent a great deal of time meeting fellow Socialist Party leaders across the continent, trade unions, community organisations, and working with the Party of European Socialists. And whatever the outcome of all this process, we are still going to be working closely with them because you're not going to deal with the climate emergency on our own. Pollution blows across the channel, both ways.
Thanks, Jeremy. And now we're going to have 3 questions from the audience. So if I can ask you just to indicate if you've got a question and we'll get the mic to you yourself. Down here. Oh, there we go.
Thank you very much. I'm Lolo from Chatham and Oxford CLP. I basically know that Brexit is very important at the moment. But as far as I'm concerned, there's more pending issues on our doorstep. And that is 4 million children plus living in abject poverty. I know we're not in government now, but as a party, isn't there anything we can do to start improving the lives of these children? Because it's totally not acceptable at all.
Okay, thank you. One more? That gentleman there? Okay. Hang on, the mic's coming.
Hello, yeah, I'm Matt from Strood South. I was just wondering, like, as a Remainer who doesn't think that we should go for a second vote, what you would be saying that for us, like a second vote to the people. I think that's like going against the democracy of the 17 million that voted to leave.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay, that's my question.
And one more.
Thank you.
Oh.
Yep, thanks, Matt.
That woman there at the end of that row? Okay.
Hi Jeremy, I'm Ravinda Giselle, known as Rav Giselle from Chatham and Elsford. While I was campaigning to become a local councillor, many people were angry. And they were angry because Brexit didn't happen and they'd rather have a no deal. What do we say to those people when we go knock on their door again? What do we actually say to them?
Okay. Thanks for the questions. First one, thank you. The problem with the debate over Brexit that's now gone on for so long in the British Parliament, that just about everything else gets drowned out for debate and discussion. And I've obviously used Prime Minister's question time many times to ask questions to the Prime Minister about Brexit. But some weeks ago, I decided I wouldn't do that. And I asked her about knife crime. I asked her about the National Health Service. I asked her about austerity and the problems that are faced across the whole country. And I had thousands of people saying thank you. Thank you for giving a voice to those other issues, and I will continue to do that. Your point about children and their opportunities in growing up. Children only obviously have one childhood. And if that childhood is one where you can't get a nursery place, your primary school is underfunded, your parents and carers don't have enough money to feed you, and your idea of getting food isn't going to a supermarket but going to a food bank, and you're growing up with hand-me-down clothes got from a charity shop or from the equivalent of a clothes bank, equivalent to a food bank of a clothes bank, then your life chances are pretty poor. There was a Select Committee report from the House of Commons Education Select Committee on the effects of nursery education or nursery opportunities. And they pointed out that children that had nursery opportunity from 2 to 4 for 30 hours a week tended to do well in primary school, well in secondary, and go on to achieve apprenticeships, university, and all the options they've got. Those children that didn't get that opportunity were between 18 months and 2 years less educationally advanced than the others by the time they reached school leaving age, at the end of year 11 in secondary school. And that's happening now in this country. And so we demand of the government to end the cuts to school budgets, to end the underfunding of schools. And in brief form, our policy is 30 hours free nursery provision for all 2 to 4-year-olds, wherever they live, no postcode lottery, wherever they live, so they all get that same opportunity and chance. Proper funding of primary schools with a free school meal for every primary school child eaten together, so you don't have the segregation between those that get the meal, those that get the sandwiches. Not right. Bad message for those children. And an investment in creative education and skill education so that children, all children through a pupil arts premium, get the opportunity to learn musical instruments and develop the functional skills that they need. That requires money and investment in the schools. And further down the line, obviously ending, as I announced at the NEU conference, SATs for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, but also further down the line beyond that is raising corporation tax in order to end university fees, so that there's a real choice whether you go to university, whether you go to vocational or whatever else. So we're giving real hope and real opportunity. In short, stop making education a commodity. make it a right, which is what I believe it to be. On the point you raised, Matt, thanks and fair point. There was a referendum, we all know what the result of that was, we all know how we voted in it, but we want to bring people together. And the view we put forward, and the party conference put this forward, and the National Executive agreed this, that we should include the option of having a ballot on a public vote on the outcome of the talks and negotiations of what we're putting forward. I would want that to be seen as a healing process and bringing this whole process to a conclusion. Nothing is easy in this, but our essential message has to be to bring people together, and that's the basis on which we've approached both what we've done in Parliament and in the negotiations itself. The point that was raised about people being angry at no deal. Yeah, or angry and saying they want no deal. I just simply say this. If we leave the EU at a given date with no deal whatsoever, what's the immediate effect? That we go on to World Trade Organization rules. There's immediately an increase in prices of goods that are coming in. There is immediately a problem on exporting. There is immediately a physical problem of getting goods across the channel one way or the other, either through Felixstowe, through Dover, or through the Channel Tunnel. There is a huge problem, and there are massive levels of disruption. And when industries in this country require just-in-time delivery to maintain their supply chain, the idea that you're going to put some kind of tariff on that means, quite simply, it's not going to happen. If the Mini is made in Britain, as it is, but the parts cross the channel several times during the construction of that car, Ford engines in Bridgend, South Wales, exactly the same thing. Nissan in Sunderland, that export largely, almost overwhelmingly, to the European Union. It's simply not going to continue as it is unless there is a customs union and trade access with the European Union. So I say to those that say, sod it all, go away, we're leaving without a deal. Think it through. Think it through seriously, what it will mean for this country, for your jobs and everything else. And that's why we have approached this in a very serious way. I've had more meetings than I've had hot dinners in the past 3 years with all kinds of people, trade unions, employers, different community organisations, lots of different groups and so on within Parliament in order to try to get us to go forward on the kind of agenda that we put forward. Customs union, access to the market, protection of rights and a serious relationship, and bring people together, and don't let the siren voices of the far right or the right in our society take over. We can conquer poverty, we can conquer unemployment, we can conquer deprivation if everybody plays their part. But when you've got a government that's more interested in tax breaks for the richest than the meal times and needs of the poorest, it's time for that government to go and get a Labour government in place that will do things differently. Thank you very much.